This is the first day of our 4-day Net Zero Research Conference. The first 2 days of this conference are structured around the themes of Network H2, which is the network for hydrogen fuel transportation, which is funded by EPSRC and led by myself here at Durham University. Network H2 brings together researchers, companies, government, and other stakeholders across the UK, and also interacts internationally with leading organizations and researchers in the transport field. The network is organized around 8 themes. Firstly, the whole transport energy system. Secondly, around pathways to sustainable hydrogen production and distribution, compact and lightweight hydrogen storage, compact and lightweight onboard energy conversion devices, lightweight electrified powertrains, hydrogen compatible materials and safety, multimodal transport and logistics and autonomy, and finally policy, economics and societal impact. The network is funded by EPSRC and was awarded so that we could act as a forum to maximize the impact of research that's being conducted, foster communication, share best practice, and disseminate information and data on hydrogen-fueled transportation research projects. Also tasked with capturing state-of-the-art in the area and identifying the research challenges, incentivize and barriers that exist, target our feasibility funding towards new cutting-edge projects, which will enable us to unlock collaborative research in this field, provide a wider forum for all stakeholders and all modes of transport and technology developers to be able to foster long-term collaboration between themselves and with new partners and new international research teams. And also to engage with the wider research community across physical sciences, social sciences, and engineering disciplines to maximize the dissemination of and impact of research outcomes and stimulate knowledge transfer between academia, industry, government, and all the other stakeholders. That's the remit of Network H2. So over the next 2 days, we will look at the challenges across the different transport modes, as well as the wider energy system required to support the hydrogen transition. So welcome back to the next session, which is the Net Zero question time. We've got 4 panelists for you for this session. And I'll introduce the panelists. So Rebecca Advani is a senior technologist with the Connected Places Catapult. She is a chartered system engineer with particular interest in low carbon technologies and policy. Her work to date has been predominantly in electric and hybrid and autonomous vehicle sector, applying mechanical, electronics and system engineering principles to innovative projects. Christina Wulf is a postdoctoral research fellow with the Institute of Energy and Climate Research in Julich. After finishing her diploma in energy and environmental engineering, she also received her doctorate degree in the field of energy systems analysis from Hamburg University of Technology. She is continuing her research on sustainability analysis of hydrogen energy systems, and been doing this since 2015. Dr. Stuart Hawksworth is from the Health and Safety Executive and the Center for Energy and Major Hazards. He's been working in safety for around 25 years, fulfilling several roles at HSE, laboratories in Buxton in the UK. Working in the area of hydrogen safety, he has led and participated in a wide range of programs looking at refueling safety, safety of hydrogen in the nuclear industry, and involved in a number of activities in the UK gas industry and government regarding the uptake of hydrogen in the gas network. He is also president of the International Association for Hydrogen Safety and a task leader in the European Hydrogen Safety Panel. So welcome to our panel. I'm just going to pose the first question to you all. In terms of transport, just outline your first thoughts about the utilization of hydrogen for the transport sectors that are of most interest to you, and aspects of the safety associated with the use of hydrogen. So maybe, Stuart, maybe you could go first.
Okay, I could talk about this for ages, so I'll try and be fairly brief. I should probably point out as well, just so everybody knows, I'm not an inspector. I do work at the lab, so I'm not saying anything that an inspector would say. So in terms of hydrogen for transport, clearly there are some kind of very interesting applications looking forward. I think you've heard about maritime and aviation this morning. Some real challenges there, but some massive potential in those areas. Road and rail are probably the key areas that are kind of significant right now. The way it's moving in the UK, most likely we're looking at fleet vehicles and buses. Those are the key areas, and from the safety point of view, we like that because they are okay. They're kind of driving the technology forward. They're allowing us to test the technology and do it at greater scale, but do it in a controlled environment. So those are really nice. We like all of that as kind of a safety regulator in principle. Cars clearly developing, very interesting, and rail. I think rail's coming along quite quickly as well. Lots of interest in the UK, the success on the continent, but clearly some issues to think about. So, I mean, for us and some of the things we're involved in around transport, refueling infrastructure are very important, and we're involved in a project called Multi-High Fuel Project. The accident scenarios involving hydrogen vehicles clearly very important, particularly as inventories start to go up. And so we're involved in something called the High Tunnel Project, which is led by Vladimir Molkov at Ulster. And that's thinking about, okay, what happens when we have these types of scenarios in difficult situations. And those are thinking very much about transport in terms of compressed hydrogen, as we're probably thinking about it very much now. But we've also been involved in a project. We are involved in a project that's coming to a close now called Presley High, looking at liquid hydrogen and the safety of liquid hydrogen, clearly really important for maritime and probably aviation. And another area, obviously ammonia, which is perhaps on the fringes of what we're talking about here. So all interested, all challenging, and all things that, you know, there are issues to resolve. So I should probably stop there before I take up too much time.
Christina.
Yeah, maybe I can add a little bit from the German perspective. So also here we will focus mainly on vehicle fleets, concentrating on buses and light duty vehicles. And for trains, I would say it's a little bit different because you have a lot of routes which are electrified. So for the trains, of course, there are several projects who are testing hydrogen in trains, but their hydrogen will only be the last option when there is no possibility to electrify. And regarding the personal vehicles, the fuel cell electric vehicles, at the moment we see some change. Of course, we have a large initiative for building a fueling infrastructure for fuel cell electric vehicles, but the number of fuel cell electric vehicles is not increasing at such a rate as expected. So there is also more shift towards the fleet-based vehicles.
Okay, thank you. Rebecca?
Hello, yes, I agree that the buses are a big starting point for fuel cells, and I know that light vehicles have had some head start, and they're very interesting for the public to think about hydrogen cars, but some of the work we've been doing at the Connected Places Catapult has looked at heavy goods vehicles, because there's quite limited options for decarbonising heavy goods vehicles. The batteries for pure electric version get quite challenging, and there are different options for charging, including on the go and electrifying the roads. But other than that, hydrogen comes up as a very interesting option, and there would be quite a scale of hydrogen needed for those kind of vehicles. And also it's fleets, so you could albeit not kind of the same structure as buses, but you could imagine the kind of captive fleets of HGVs going back to a depot or between certain ports and depots, that you could start to build out the infrastructure in parallel with the vehicles. So that's one area that is possibility for quite large volumes of hydrogen being required.
Thanks, Rebecca. We've been joined by Phil Greening, Professor Phil Greening. So I'll introduce Phil. He's director of two research centres, Centre for Sustainable Road Freight and the Centre for Logistics and Sustainability. And he works at Herriot University. Phil, we're just dealing with the first question. I guess really it's about the modes of transport that will drive the transition for hydrogen and the impact of that in terms of safety as well.
Okay, yeah. So, and I caught most of it. I apologise for being late. Microsoft failed to alert me that I was supposed to be somewhere else again. So, a couple of comments, I think. Taking the German experience that Christina was talking about just now, I think our view is that hydrogen is a good option where you can't directly electrify, and there are a number of options on road freight where you can do that, as in you can directly electrify and have overhead cables, for instance, along the strategic road network. That doesn't mean there isn't a role for hydrogen. There still could be, because there'll be parts of the network that aren't easily accessed, the road network that can't easily be accessed from the strategic road system. I think one of the things that we are starting to acknowledge and consider more is how we move from a ubiquitous fuel system, which is effectively diesel or petrol, to one that is no longer ubiquitous. So where should it be applied, and how does it integrate with the rest of the energy system? And this is probably the main strength of hydrogen, is how it touches the rest of the energy system, as opposed to considering it in isolated sort of pockets of, you know, is it good for road freight? Is it good for maritime? Or is it good for aviation? It's the holistic applicability of hydrogen that probably is its main strength. And as far as I can see, there's very little consideration, certainly in my field, of that whole picture. And that's probably the biggest driver of it, of the uptake for hydrogen systems.
Okay.
I just make a note on that last point, that I in the early stages, but I know that the Tees Valley Hydrogen Hub is trying to look at how to put all of the different transport applications, at least for hydrogen, in one area and one place. So hopefully there will be more initiatives like that are a hydrogen hub or something to work out how to. It might be transport focused or else between different industries as well. As you say, there's a lot of synergies that are possible.
Yeah, I guess following on for that, I mean, do you think that demonstrations like Teesside are the best way to take things forward for hydrogen transport?
I think some real world demonstrations are definitely certain and getting up to a scale of demonstration to help iron out some of the issues and help people trust and understand it. Something especially that we looked at in the HGV sector is for operators to really trust that any kind of new technology can meet their operational requirements. They need to have confidence of it working in the real world with different kinds of operations. So I think the next phase for a lot of this will be increasingly large demonstrations with as much real world operation as possible.
Maybe I could ask Christina whether there are similar demonstrations going on that you're aware of in and around Europe.
Yeah, there are many demonstration projects in Europe. So, of course, the EU is funding with the fuel cell and hydrogen joint undertaking a lot of projects, not only in the transport field but also for industry applications. And then at the moment we have in Germany a very large interest of hydrogen projects, but as well not so much in the transport sector, but how to use hydrogen for industry purposes. And then maybe if we have hydrogen, they try to make concepts for hydrogen, so using the hydrogen not only for the industrial application, but then also fueling their fleet or their light duty vehicles with hydrogen. So they're more holistic concepts, not focusing anymore so much only on hydrogen. And yeah, I also know that there are, for example, some projects in the Baltic Sea for hydrogen ferries and so on.
Okay, thank you. So the next question that was posed by our participants today, which aspects of hydrogen for mobility require a greater level of scrutiny? Maybe we'll start with Phil.
Okay, I think where my eye focuses, at least, is on the energy efficiency of hydrogen production. Clearly, if you generate electrons and those electrons can be passed directly to the wheels of a vehicle, then that's the most, generally is the most efficient solution. So there's a trade-off though between the energy efficiency of production with also the general applicability of hydrogen in other applications, so such as heating or for maritime where you couldn't directly electrify, or vehicles and aircraft, for instance. So there's that trade-off of where you can use hydrogen in many more places and many more applications, but it's energy efficient to produce, inefficient to produce. There are those applications where direct electricity is more efficient and easier to implement, and that's the area of scrutiny for me. Is how do you resolve and understand those contexts well enough that you can start making decisions about investment in the infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. Stuart?
I guess I'll stick with hydrogen and safety. So I think I mentioned the multi-high fuel, the high tunnel project, and kind of understanding accident scenarios involving hydrogen vehicles. So, and this is applicable to kind of all types of vehicles. You know, well, the High Tunnel project is focusing on very much around road and rail at the moment. Much of its applicability in terms of physics of release of hydrogen into confined spaces with ventilation, without all kinds of kind of complicated things going on, are really important. It applies to aircraft, to shipping, and all of this. So I think that's an important area we need to understand, and understand what controls we put in place and what kind of interactions we get there. So that's a key area. How do we kind of get hydrogen to kind of work safely in infrastructure? The other one for me is around liquid hydrogen, which I think is clearly will get adoption in many more applications. And I know there's interest, I think, in industry for further projects, kind of thinking about the safety of liquid hydrogen, particularly as you scale up for shipping and for aircraft as well. You know, the amounts of liquid hydrogen we will need will be very large, and to get a grip on that is, I think, is an important area and something that needs to be scrutinized.
Rebecca?
Yeah, I had a similar thought about sort of where the hydrogen comes from. In a way, I don't know if it's the challenge is that transport isn't necessarily going to define what happens with hydrogen in the rest of the economy. So there's an area of working out where transport leads and where it follows. For example, hydrogen for heat or other applications. But I personally feel that the option of blue hydrogen, so hydrogen from methane, and then with very efficient, hopefully, carbon capture and storage, and potentially also some biomass, so that you end up with negative emission hydrogen as part of the mix, gives a separate pathway for the hydrogen that we need in all areas of the economy, and means that we're not trying to electrify everything in the whole economy, which would be similar if we're trying to use electrolysis, because we will have a limited amount of renewables. So as I say, I think it's working out how transport can lead, and maybe it comes back to the synergies of both different modes of transport working together. Then maybe there's a bigger demand for the actual quantity of hydrogen, and then driving where and how it might be produced.
Christina?
So after electrifying everything that is possible and economically possible, and then using a lot of hydrogen, there's still some part of the transport system left that will still rely on liquid fuels, like we have heard this morning in aviation and maritime industry. So for example, ammonia and other e-fuels. So in my point of view, we need to look more into efficient ways to produce these e-fuels, and where to use them in the most efficient way, because of course they are not really energy efficient. Then you produce first hydrogen, and then you transform them to liquid fuels again. So we really have to consider where we want to use these rather high valuable fuels.
Just to follow up on Phil, on your point about you said that your focus is on the efficiency of conversion to hydrogen. May I suggest that it's not really the efficiency, it's the cost. It's the cost of the hydrogen. And if we have a massive amount of offshore wind that we will be abating, and we will have access to, then there is the projection and target that we get down to $1 per kilogram of hydrogen. Doesn't efficiency become less important then?
yes and no, I think, is the answer. I think the working assumption that you've put in place there is that we will have lots of low cost or free energy because we're curtailing the wind turbines. Yeah, and that's an unanswered question to me as to whether you will ever have enough to bring the cost down to where you're suggesting, and to really get some understanding around that, you need to understand demand across all the hydrogen applications, and I'm not sure we're there yet. The second piece is and it's very sensitive, I think, this equation. If you don't have enough free energy, then the equation starts to work in the opposite way. You know, the energy that you do have to generate becomes very expensive. So understanding that piece, as you quite rightly suggested, is absolutely the most important thing in making the decision about how much hydrogen you use and therefore how much you generate. And I don't think we're there yet. There's projections. They don't seem to fully recognise the demand side part of the equation, and that's partly because we haven't quantified it sufficiently well. It's nobody's fault. It's just work in progress, I think.
Yeah, from my understanding, I don't think we can rely on only the sort of spilt wind for everything we're saying that we want to convert to hydrogen in the economy. So it might be a part of the answer, but once everything in the whole country needs to be zero emission, there'll be lots of ways that people are trying to use every last bit of every kind of renewable energy that we can get. So it's not necessarily that hydrogen will be the only demand on that sort of excess renewables. So it will be a bit of a different balance in that future world.
Yeah, so the same is true for Germany. So at the moment, so many sectors have already claimed hydrogen that they want to use, that it's already clear that in Germany, not enough hydrogen can be produced to fit the demand. And they are discussing about importing hydrogen from other regions of the world. But of course, you have to have in mind that in Germany, we are only talking about green hydrogen, so based on electrolysis, and blue hydrogen from steam methane reforming and carbon capture and storage is not really a much discussed option because of the carbon capture part.
So that's quite different to the UK and to other European countries, I guess, in terms of, I think, the Netherlands as well. So blue hydrogen is seen to be the route to being able to produce sufficient volumes of hydrogen for the prospective demand, not just transport, but for decarbonisation of industry in particular. So I guess there's the prospect of a transition from blue to green over a period of time when renewables become more ramped up and available. So another question raised by the audience was banning diesel and petrol engines has been a blunt instrument in the UK, but disruptive. What other blunt interventions should we be considering? Who would like to go first?
I can chip in quickly with it and then get out of the room, which is carbon pricing has to play a big part in all of this. So it's way out of kilter from what's required. The timescale we've got to decarbonise is very, very short. And that also, for me at least, poses a question about whether carbon capture and storage will ever be ready in time for the hydrogen economy to dominate. So yeah, carbon pricing. Do it. Put the price up. Get us all onto the right footing.
Have you any feel for the price?
No, and I think that's part of the discussion, isn't it? Is that how high does it have to go in order to change behaviours? Is not a simple question.
Sure, there are lots of studies on it as well, though. But yes, that was going to be my answer as well: carbon tax or carbon price. And I know that there are a lot of people looking at what the numbers on that should be. I don't personally know them, but I think the economists are working on some of that.
Yes.
So this was my choice as well. So carbon pricing, and as it was said earlier this morning, it needs to be an international carbon pricing system. If we just do it nationally, then there might be difficulties for some industry sectors. And we also have to have in mind some social aspects. So we probably need some transfer payments to avoid energy poverty, or also transport poverty, I would just call it. So in the rural areas, at least in Germany, the public transport system is not so great, and many people still rely on their own vehicles. So yeah, there are some side effects that have to be considered.
Stuart?
I agree with everyone else. I mean, let's get to the nub of the problem, and that it's clearly carbon. So that's the focus, I think.
So what are the views on us achieving a sensible carbon price, and by when? I mean, do we think that there is enough commitment and focus? So are we looking at towards COP26, or do we think it's going to be much more protracted?
I think you've got to put some hope in COP26, really starting the process aggressively. Yeah, I think there's a growing recognition that time is definitely running out, but reaching consensus is a massive challenge.
Yes.
Yeah, it needs to. If it's going to happen, it needs to happen internationally. Anybody doing it unilaterally, clearly, would just penalise that nation so much. So.
Yeah. So when you have maritime governed by IMO, and the setting of standards and things through bodies such as that, they're so painfully slow in achieving any consensus and then acting on it. So hopefully COP26 will make a big breakthrough. Another question from the audience is, what is the next breakthrough technology for the sector, do you believe? Christina, would you like to go first?
Yeah, but I don't have a definite answer, because in my point of view, there's no silver bullet, as mentioned earlier. And now we have to, the basic technology inventions, I think, are there, and we have to focus now on economy of scale to get fuel cells less expensive, more reliable, and so on. The same is true for electrolyzer systems. Yeah, so we have to scale it up now.
So it's mainly about scale and cost reduction. So we have the technology already. It's
I think in some parts we have it to start, I would say. of course, for the long run, we still have to work on some other technologies. For example, the already mentioned solid oxide fuel cells, and the same is true for solid oxide electrolyzer cells.
You know, those technologies have been around and thought about from transport for, as I mentioned earlier, I did a keynote about solid oxide fuel cells and led a project on solid oxide fuel cells for marine over 25 years ago. Yeah. And the technology hasn't really improved significantly since then. So I guess I'll come back to my point in a minute. Maybe Rebecca, you come up with an answer.
Yeah, I think if any of us actually knew what the next breakthrough would be, we'd be investing in it. And I don't like to bet too much. Just on the other technologies, the storage hopefully will continue to have advances and potentially breakthroughs in some solid storage or other ways of reducing the volume of storing hydrogen. I think that's one of the challenges in many areas, and I suppose the same with the liquid storage, to make that as efficient as possible. So I think that we, as Christina says, there is the technology to do what we need to do, but the more efficient, reliable, and the smaller and lighter the storage can be, the easier it will be to fit on board all the different kinds of vehicles and vessels, and still also that will affect the cost if you've not got to take up as much cargo space with the storage system. So hopefully that will continue to improve.
Stuart?
Let's dream teleportation powered by hydrogen. That would be fantastic, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think a key thing, clearly, agreeing with Rebecca, storage is a challenge. You know, if we look at various applications, shipping, aviation, rail, trucks, they're all moving to larger volumes of hydrogen, which means bigger infrastructure to support. And hydrogen infrastructure is not trivial. I mean, it's possible, but in terms of storing large amounts of hydrogen, there's some things that start to happen from a regulatory point of view that don't happen with other fuels, not for a long time. So, you know, there are some things that need to be thought about there. And if we could find a way to store masses of hydrogen, very high density, that would be fantastic.
Yeah. Phil?
In a way, I'm going to sort of cop out and then come back to the question. I think it's the wrong question. I don't think it's technology that's got to change the most. I think it's behaviour, just general carbon literacy amongst the population would help there. But if you really want to focus on technology and not to repeat what's been said already, I guess things like microgrids for energy and appropriate energy generation storage in the poorer areas of the world will be really important. I think in terms of the more sophisticated economies, how we access energy will need new systems to be developed. So that for me is around data, Internet of Things, in transport terms, vehicle-to-vehicle communications. Those will all have a very big impact.
Okay. I guess just a kind of final roundup between you all. I just kind of ask whether there's any questions that you would have liked to have been asked around hydrogen that you've got a good answer for. I guess, you know, I just summing up what you think the future of hydrogen is for transportation. So I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but maybe Christina, maybe you could go first.
So I think there will be many different solutions for hydrogen in transport. So probably in some places we will see also novel storage things, for example, in a solid form. You can see hydrogen transport in heavy-duty vehicles, but there will also other fuels for transport. Of course, pure electricity and also e-fuels.
Rebecca?
I just saw there was a question on the chat, I think something about the blue hydrogen that I mentioned, so I could just clarify that first. That Sophia, asked on the how do you make blue hydrogen. Blue hydrogen is just the term that people use for when you make hydrogen from a fossil fuel, but then capture 95, hopefully even more % of the CO2 with carbon capture storage. So that's blue hydrogen is what you get at the end of that. And you can also put biofuels in at the beginning and then get hydrogen out at the end. And I don't know, I assume there's a different color for that. There's a whole rainbow of hydrogen, but not everyone agrees on what color is which. And that means that you end up with hydrogen that has effectively negative emissions if you have captured the carbon in the biofuels and then capture it again when you do the conversion to hydrogen. So hopefully that clears that up. And yeah, I hope that with all of the net zero areas we do start scaling up. Almost, I don't mind what we scale up, but something, because as Phil was saying, we are running out of time, and I think there's a lot of big infrastructure investment and governments both on a national and international scale needing to make some commitments that might not always be popular. So, but not all of it can be done, certainly by industry. So I think we need to just think big, and maybe we will make some mistakes, but I think there's a lot of considering between the options, when actually getting on with one option now would be better than getting on with no options until 20 years down the line, which is what I'm slightly worried about.
Thank you. Stuart?
So I guess it's a little bit preachy, this, but sorry. You know, in terms of we had the whole of last century learning how to do things safely with the fuels we've used, and we're in quite a good place now. We now want to change things very, very rapidly and make some really big differences in a very short time, and we need to do that safely. So what we don't want is some serious incidents that undermine the whole thing. So this just isn't hydrogen, this applies to all technologies. So please, in whatever you're doing, think about safety at the beginning, build it in from the beginning, make sure it's funded and it's part of your project, and you don't try and add it on at the end, because that's often when things go wrong. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Phil?
So first of all, I think hydrogen probably definitely has a role somewhere in the energy mix. Just need to settle on that. But two questions I think I would have liked to have been asked. One would be about the readiness of carbon capture and storage. I think that's critical, not because there's any likelihood that we can't actually do it in the long term. The question is whether we can do it quick enough in order for it to be enable the blue hydrogen to be a good pathway. And then my second question, which is really throw a hand grenade in the room and then run, is are negative emissions an illusion?
Okay, well, I think we'll leave it there and we can follow up on that at a later date during the conference, maybe. Okay, we've come to the end of the time. So thanks to Stuart, Rebecca, Christina, and Phil for fielding those questions. It was a great discussion and debate. And so thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Thank you.